Today in the United States, every child has a right to free public education. Yet so commonly in schools around the country, there are groups of underrepresented students who have their opportunity to participate in an equitable education stripped from them. Students of color, students who identify as LGBTQ+, students who are multilinguistic, and students who originated in a country other than the United States are just a few examples of groups that are too often neglected when it comes to receiving the education that is promised to them. In this commentary, I will focus mainly on students of color and varying ethnicities and the hardships they have and continue to face when participating in the American education system. More specifically, I will address how the history, laws, practices, and ideologies each contribute to upholding the societal construct that perpetuates white supremacy in education.
Step in front of a runaway train just to feel alive again, pushing forward through the night, aching just to blur aside. It's so far away. It's so far away.
California teacher is now on leave after this video went viral. The teacher appears to be explaining SOHCAHTOA, a term used to help memorize trigonomic functions, often criticized when paired with offensive native imagery. In the more than 2 minutes of video, which has now been viewed by millions online, the Riverside teacher is seen in a headdress made of paper feathers with imaginary tomahawks in her hands, hopping around the room and screaming. The video was filmed by a student in the class, according to family friend Akale Brown, who then clipped the video and uploaded it online.
How is that student doing?
The student is very concerned, actually, for the well-being of the teacher. He's actually said he was happy that it happened to him. We're glad it happened with someone who was able to digest it instead of internalize it and go home and hurt themselves.
Ever since the first colonizers stepped foot onto American soil, they have sought to assimilate everyone and everything to their quote-unquote white standard. This white standard is an imaginary mindset that has real and deadly implications for those who don't fit into these made-up guidelines. For example, if you do not speak English, then you are considered a savage. If you do speak English but are judged by colonizers that you don't speak English well enough to be considered fluent, then you are also considered a savage. If you have skin color that is not white, you are not considered equal. If you are born in a country other than colonized America, then you will always be considered an outsider. Even if you were born in colonized America, yet don't look or speak the same way as colonists do, then you are still considered an outsider.
At one point, the teacher is seen jumping on top of desks and stomping before sitting atop her own desk and calling out to the, quote, water goddess.
Because obviously this is ridiculous.
We think of Native people as existing in these primitive past tense stereotypes.
Elizabeth Ellis is a Native woman and history professor at New York University.
And if you are expecting Native people to be running around in leather and feathers, it's hard to think of them in the contemporary moment. And this actually really limits our access to political power and to be taken seriously as Native people.
The quote-unquote white standard has even applied to education for centuries. An example of this is found through the personal anecdotes and experiences told by Zidkalasa. She writes about her time being transferred to an Indian boarding school away from her family, and she slowly loses touch with her Native American culture that she grew up with. She was not removing herself from her culture on purpose. The colonists had taken her and other children from similar Native American cultures to be assimilated into a quote-unquote more civilized human. The colonists who ran these boarding schools treated them like animals and would constantly dehumanize the children because they were not yet meeting the quote-unquote white standard that colonists enforced on a place that never belonged to them to begin with. Throughout the time colonists took over this land, and even till today, specific laws, court cases, and societal structures each play a significant role in maintaining the white American standard, especially in the education system. The Immigration Acts of the 20th century and the Brown v. Board of Education court case are two large contributors that have been abused and taken advantage of for the purpose of segregating and barring students from minority communities to not receiving equitable education opportunities. The Immigration Acts, beginning in 1917, was a barrier blocking Asian, Mexican, and Mediterranean immigrants from entering the U.S., along with restricting people with mental and physical handicaps or those with criminal records. The Immigration Act of 1921 restricted the amount of immigrants allowed into the country. The Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952 now only excluded immigration from quote-unquote ideologically undesirable countries. And the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 established a quota for refugees entering the country, along with restricting immigration from Mexico for the first time. This was just one of the many ways that the U.S.'s laws exposed the white American standard that is held so tightly.
I would just like to see the proof of wrongdoing. I would like to see the tests.
Well, let me reiterate, there has been no proof of wrongdoing here, only a suspicion of cheating.
In this country, one is innocent until proven guilty, not the other way around.
If you're so confident of your students' abilities, why not encourage them to retest?
Why should I?
If they don't, everyone will assume they cheated.
Everyone will assume they cheated if they do. I want to see the test, please.
We're going around in circles here. Mrs. Escalante, we're psychometricians. They're to the point of boring. We're not out to get anybody here.
Not so fast. If this was a simple situation of two students cheating, that's one thing. But by making a blanket accusation, you're saying that there was a conspiracy. Every conspiracy has a leader. Who better qualified to be the leader than their teacher?
Mr. Escalante, nobody's accusing you here of anything.
Not only me. The school, the parents, the entire community.
Scores is high. I guarantee you would be questioned regardless of the school.
Yes, but if this was Beverly Hills High School, they wouldn't have sent you two to investigate.
The case of Brown v. Board of Education being compared to the Immigration Acts may strike people as incorrect, since the court case was said to have set a precedent that ended educational segregation based on race. That should be a good thing, right? Yes, although the end of racial segregation in schools was initially celebrated as a victory for many communities, the way that the precedent was written allowed for teachers and administration who tightly held on to the white American standard to create loopholes and exceptions that still allowed segregation, just legally, not by race. For example, in Rothstein's 2014 article in which he discusses the impact of Brown v. Board's outcome on black students, Rothstein states, "But Brown was unsuccessful in his purported mission to undo the school segregation that persists as a central feature of American public education today. This is substantiated by how schools, after the court case, began to segregate communities based on language spoken, or how they would allow racialized students to now enter the school, but they would not be offered the same opportunities as their white peers." Teaching practices throughout the turbulent landscape of education have remained static for many decades, especially regarding race. However, in more recent times, there has been a greater shift towards inclusion in schools for students of all identities. Yet with a greater shift, there is also a greater resistance to that shift from many people who still wish to uphold the made-up concept of what it means to be quote-unquote American. One of these practices that is actually barring students of color from feeling recognized is known as colorblindness. Practicing racial colorblindness is actually counterproductive to encouraging inclusion. This practice comes off as a way to ignore the discriminations and unfair treatment of students of color in the past and even to this day. Without acknowledgement and accountability, then there is no way for this country to learn from its mistakes and to grow from them in a more responsible and inclusive direction. I believe Coley said it best in her 2017 article that discusses colorblind racism. She states, "Despite attempts to equate colorblindness to equity, qualitative and conceptual studies demonstrate how silence around race maintains and legitimates racism. thus constructing hostile racial climates for students of color.
You know, deep down inside, I think you wish you were black.
Get the fuck out of here.
Laugh if you want to. You know, your hair is kinkier than mine. What does that mean? And you know what they say about dark Italians?
You know, I've been listening and reading.
You've been reading now?
I read. I've been reading about your leaders, Reverend Al, Mr. Dew, Sharp Tone, Jesse. Keep hope alive.
That's fucked up.
Keep hope alive.
Hey, that's fucked. Don't talk about Jesse.
And even the other guy, what's his name? Farrakhan.
Minister Farrakhan.
All right, sorry. Minister Farrakhan. Anyway, Minister Farrakhan always talks about the so-called day when the black man will rise. We will one day, what does he say? We will one day rule the earth as we did in our glorious past?
Yeah, that's right.
What past you talking about? I mean, what did I miss?
We started civilization.
Man, keep dreaming, man. Then you woke up.
Pino, fuck you, fuck your fucking pizza, and fuck Frank Sinatra.
Yeah? Well, fuck you too, and fuck Michael Jackson.
The actors and groups that surround the community of education for students of color are the students themselves, their teachers, and their families. The students are involved simply by existing in America, where a free K-12 public education is supposedly available for all. Meanwhile, there are teachers who are also involved because they interact with the students most in their place of education on a day-to-day basis. Both of these actors are affected by regulations voted on by the school board and state laws that impact the schools they are in. The families of these students of color are involved because their children are enrolled in the schools, and the majority of these families want their child to receive an equitable education. The families are affected, though, when they may have to work longer hours, or they may not have the privilege to attend school board meetings and parent-teacher conferences like other families who do fit into that quote-unquote white American standard. This non-purposeful lack of presence means that their culture and community are not only underrepresented in society, but are also not presented well on the school level for their children. In Marshall's 2006 article that takes a deep dive into parent involvement and its impact on student achievement, he writes, "In addition to previously established aspects of effective school organizations, governing arrangements and Latino political incorporation play a critical role in building stronger, more supportive school-parent relations and in encouraging higher levels of parent involvement in formal school activities."
Class, if you are wondering why Principal Coleman is sitting in today, fret not. It's just a standard run-of-the-mill classroom observation. There's absolutely nothing to worry about. I'm a little worried. This is very unstandard and out of the mill for Ava. We all know how we have been taught to think about Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, but they were actually much more similar in their philosophies by the end of their lives than they were at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, people said they didn't get along, but that's not true.
Talk about it. Anybody else know anything about their real relationship?
They almost swapped philosophies towards the end.
Oh, for real?
For real. White people wanted to pit them against each other.
That is right, Paul. See, history is constantly being rewritten. That is why you need to question everything. Okay? You should even question me, a white teacher.
Currently happening in schools is a continuation of the ignorance that teachers, faculty, and administration have regarding students of color, their families, and their overall communities. Not only this ignorance, but also a fear of shifting the narrative from what that quote-unquote white standard is believed to mean in education to a more inclusive curriculum. The long-term impact of these ideologies is that if nothing is done to shift this narrative of the white standard, then students of color will not be able to fulfill or live up to the standards that are unfairly placed on them in society. An article that goes into further detail about the critical theory on communities of color, written by Iftikhar and Musaeus, states, "White supremacy maintains ideological tropes that structure racialized experiences and identities, interacts with global colonial and imperial projects to influence Asian American experiences, and shapes how racially marginalized people navigate, engage with, and utilize the racial categories through which white supremacy attempts to homogenize and essentialize them."
So I was like, Malcolm X, more like Malcolm, why we gotta be in this class so long?
Oh, hey there.
Paul and I were just discussing today's Black History lesson.
Then I bet it was better, considering Mr. Hill wasn't teaching it.
Oh, he was teaching it, and he's gonna continue to. Don't judge him by the color of his skin, but by the content of his class. Wow, I just made that up.
So you didn't listen to any of my concerns.
Why are you just now getting concerned? I found out in class that Jacob teaches about Black historical figures all year, not just February. Did you just start paying attention this month?
Oh, I didn't know that.
Nor did I. Looks like we both learned something today.
Son?
See you later.
What a shame. So hot, yet so very annoying.
Altogether, the historical, lawful, practical, and ideological aspects of the made-up white standard have and continue to negatively impact the education system of America to this day, especially for students of color, along with many other underrepresented student groups and identities. There should be an acknowledgement of the past, respect for the present, and positive action for the future in order for these aspects of whiteness to finally begin to topple down like the imaginary house of cards that they are.